The Kharkiv School of Photography is one of the most coherent and influential chapters in the history of Ukrainian art of the late 20th, early 21st century. The collocation, Kharkiv School of Photography, has been widely circulating, occasionally triggering discussions about the relevance of the word school in it. I have to stress that we are not talking about any sort of educational center. The term school here is used as a theoretical construction known in art history from the 18th century. It typically refers to a group of artists who share a similar style, artistic philosophy, or cultural influence and often work in the same time period or geographical location. For instance, there were painting schools in Renaissance Italy like the Venetian School, or closer to our topic, New York School and Boston School of Photography. All these phenomena are defined by three main characteristics: the unity of place, a set of shared methods and approaches, and generational continuity. We can find all these three ingredients present in the history of the Kharkiv School of Photography. It's a community of three generations of photographers which has been evolving in Kharkiv, a big industrial and cultural center in the east of Ukraine. From the mid-1960s, experimentation was central to the artistic process, incorporating a range of technologies that allowed intervening and manipulating images. By tackling sensitive and taboo subjects, these photographers pushed the restrictive conventions of official Soviet photography, paving the way for more expressive and personal forms of artistic expression that would be essential in the years to come when Ukraine regained its independence. The first generation of the Kharkiv School of Photography was shaped in the 1960s, 1980s, both by and in opposition to the environment of the late Soviet visual culture. It was inherently hierarchical, recognizing the existence of two realms of photography, reportage and amateur. The former was praised as the medium's highest form, as the only one that can meet the requirements of being ideologically engaged and highlighting the class struggle. Meanwhile, art photography was virtually invisible and exiled to the margins of visual culture, to the era of amateur practices. Its peripheral location had its own benefits, providing photographers with a certain level of freedom. Amateur photography was more accepting of experiments with form, otherwise condemned by the state, thus creating potential fundament for enriching the language of photographic media itself. The popularization of amateur photography was connected with the development of the photo club networks. Those were state-run institutions that offered both professional photographers and photography enthusiasts a space for sharing information, demonstrating their works, and getting access to some resources like cameras or photo paper. It was also an efficient method of controlling the way Soviet people organized their leisure time. Naturally, the history of the Kharkiv School of Photography begins in one of those many photo clubs, namely the regional photo club at the Trades Union Amateur Arts House, which opened in 1965. We even have a journal of this photo club preserved where one can find the list of attendees and topics that were discussed during the meetings. Soviet photographic materials like developers or photo paper were considerably poor in quality. Predictably, it led photographers to focus on techniques and the way the perfect quality of their prints could be achieved, lenses, cameras, and so on. The last pages of the Filevska photo, the main periodical on photography in the USSR, were almost always dedicated to some technical tricks to alleviate the amateur struggle against the material. In this obsession with technical issues, the questions of aesthetics and the aims of photography were barely discussed. Dissatisfaction with such a situation was one of the binding aspects for the 8 members of the regional camera club, who eventually created the Vremya group around 1971. The title of the group is translated from Russian as Time. Its 8 participants were Anatoly Makiyenko, Oleg Malovany, Boris Mikhailov, Evgeny Pavlov, Yuri Rupin, Alexander Sitnichenko, Alexander Suprun, and Gennady Tubolev. Almost all of them had technical background that varied from engineering to physics. They often worked at the research institutes, and this gave them the skill set to master complex darkroom processes quickly, thus freeing their attention and allowing them to focus on whys and what force. The Soviet approach to photojournalism emphasized a uniquely engaged form of photography, one that focused on the ability to capture the life truth. This approach stood in contrast to Western documentary photography, which was often seen as detached and uninvolved. Soviet photographers were tasked with finding typical individuals who exemplified the socialist lifestyle and their alignment with socialist ideology, measured the truthfulness of the resulting images. All aesthetical experiments were labeled as bourgeois and decadent and were criticized for drifting from depicting the objective reality, which was in fact its idealized form but approved by the party. Therefore, official critique met artistic experiments with almost open hostility and condescension. The Vremya Group's activity wasn't based on creating co-authored pieces, but rather on building a horizontal network for discussions and sharing thoughts, which was impossible in the overregulated institutional space. Another factor of this urge to create such a group was the informational isolation of the USSR. So the artists had to put an effort into finding possibilities to exhibit abroad or participate in contests. The archive of Yuri Rupin, who moved to Vilnius with his family in 1990, contains numerous letters to his foreign colleagues in Finland, France, Italy, Sweden, the United States, and other countries. In those letters, he asked for information about the upcoming events or some assistance with sending the applications in exchange for whatever was available to a Soviet photographer, and art albums or vinyl records. The ambition to make themselves known can be felt in numerous details, like the logo with an owl as a symbol of the group. We don't have an official explanation for what stands the logo, but Tatiana Pavlova suggested quite a poetic interpretation. Apart from being associated with vision due to its big eyes, owl is a nocturnal bird in opposition to the solar nature of totalitarian cultures that required complete lucidity and visibility of those it controls. This logo appears on the vertical sides of the prints made by the members of the Vremya Group. Along with it, we can find numerous stamps from Mykolaiv, Odessa, Riga. They prove that those prints took part in the exchange exhibitions organized by the photo clubs from all over the USSR. Unfortunately, we have a rather scattered image of the group's activity, as not many documents of it have been preserved. There are a couple of protocols of general meetings of the regional photo club at the Trades Union Amateur Arts House. They provide evidence that the group took control in directing the photo club in 1975. However, practically the very same year, the group had to leave the club after the scandal with the administration. According to Yuri Rupin, the conflict was sparked by his collage titled Night. It's not only the depiction of nudity, which might have been interpreted as pornographic by the authorities, that caused the scandal. They recognized the pavement that was used in the collage. That is the pavement from Kharkiv's main square, the Freedom Square, which was named after Felix Dzerzhinsky back then. It was the location for the building of the regional party committee, Der Sprong building, famous constructivist architectural monument, and the Kharkiv State University. And of course, there was a statue of Lenin located on it. Thus, even suggesting a naked woman could lay in such a sacred place was viewed as complete blasphemy. Whether the story is true or not, after 1975, the collaborative initiatives of the group started to cease. The only show of the group was held in 1983 at the Kharkiv House of Scientists, over a decade after Vremya had been founded. The show was meant to revive the image of the group, which had already held a significant place in the local photographic community. That's why the event took the symbolic location in the memory of the Kharkiv photographers of the young generation who were present at the vernissage. The show has also become a part of the Kharkiv School of Photography's storyline due to the censorship. The administration of the House of Scientists decided to take the exposition down during the opening, fearing the reaction of punitive authorities. Another crucial fact associated with the show is the manifesto of the group, which is said to have been read out by Yuri Rupin during the opening. The manifesto presented a concept that united diverse approaches of the artists, the blow theory. The concept of the blow theory claimed that photography should have an unexpected, startling, like a punch in the face effect on a viewer, interrupting habitual, automatized patterns of perception. This effect was achieved by intervening with the images using different techniques, which we will review in a moment. They provided the needed aesthetic veil of estrangement with familiar things. Otherwise, the steering effect could have been produced by employing taboo topics like nakedness, unsightly living conditions, and absurdity of mass ideological events. All these methods were by no means exclusive to the Vremya group. The Kharkiv artists accumulated and transformed influences from several sources, namely from Lithuania. Lithuania enjoyed a larger level of artistic freedom in comparison to other republics of the USSR, although remaining under tight control of the center. Since the reform of the 1930s, all kinds of art, from painting to literature and cinematography in the USSR, were regulated by so-called state creative unions. But by 1989, though there was no union of photography, and photographers were subordinated to the union of journalists. Unlike the rest of the country, Lithuanians had established their regional society of art photography 20 years prior, in 1969. Lithuania became a photographic mecca for the USSR, organizing exhibitions, workshops, and publishing photo books. Until the mid-1980s, pretty much all the knowledge the global audience had about Soviet photography was largely shaped by Lithuanian authors, whose works had been widest exposure and international events among the participants from the USSR. Similar to Kharkiv artists, the Lithuanian community sought to distance themselves from the official photographic cliches. Although they've chosen a slightly different path towards it, fusing the formula of humanistic photography with national topics, their determination to establish photography as a self-sufficient form of art deeply inspired Kharkiv. But it wasn't a mere observation. Many Kharkiv authors had direct contacts with colleagues from Baltic countries like Vitas Luckus. Luckus was one of the revolutionary characters in the history of Lithuanian photography. He was friends with Boris Mikhailov, Yuri Rupin, and Oleg Malovany. Another important source involved in shaping methods and approaches of the Kharkiv School of Photography were Eastern Bloc photography periodicals. Czech and Polish photo magazines like Revue Fotografia, Fotografia, Czechoslovenska Fotografia were defined by significantly less ideologized content. It was on their pages that Kharkiv photographers could learn more about different visual experiments with film and prints. Those periodicals also occasionally showcased the works of Western photographers and contained ample discussions on different aesthetic aspects of the media, including the genre of nude photography. The latter was tabooed as pornographic in the USSR. Boris Mikhailov recalls that once in the 1960s, after the KGB had searched his flat and found photographs with half-naked women, he tried to defend his right to make nudes, showing the official Polish and Czech press. The authorities replied, "You're allowed to look at them, but you are not allowed to make them yourself." The schizophrenic split of the late Soviet time forced Kharkiv photographers to navigate between the limits of allowed and forbidden. And not surprisingly, the first publications of their works abroad were made in the Eastern European magazines, namely, in 1973, Polish Fotografia published Evgeny Pavlov's series Violin. It had been created a year before, in 1972, during Pavlov's trip to the countryside with a group of hippie friends. The series is titled after the musical instrument which is present in almost all images. It is one of the most iconic artworks in the narrative of the Kharkiv School of Photography, which presents several aspects essential to this artistic phenomenon. First of all, it is a massive presentation of such socially charged and tabooed topic as male nudity. The violin also deliberately employs staging as one of the key visual tools, in opposition to the make-believe documentality nourished in the official Soviet photography. Pavlov explored the media by highlighting purely photographic nuances. Among them, we can point at the visible distortions brought by the horizon panoramic camera, which would have been labeled as formalist in the USSR. And in this series, Pavlov also attempted to expand the language of photography with other art forms like happenings and cinematography, giving the composition likeness to a still frame from a movie. Yuri Rupin followed the steps of Pavlov, creating the Bass House series later in 1972. The location where the images were taken is identified in the very title of the series. The straight prints feature pictorially scenes of antique-like male bodies in steamy haze. However, the images published in Czechoslovenska Fotografii in 1974 was of heavily solarized version. Solarization is one of the techniques of the so-called fotografika. It's a term that combines the words fotografia, photography, and grafika, graphic art. Polish photographer Jan Bulgak coined it to differentiate artistic photographs from utilitarian ones. The term gradually made its way into other Slavic languages and commonly refers to techniques that are used to manipulate an image to make it resemble a graphic piece. This can be achieved, for example, by eliminating intermediary tones and accentuating lines, fills, and contrasts. In the early 1970s, Rupin experimented prolifically with photografika. On one hand, it offered a safe way of working with sensitive topics of nudity. On the other hand, such interventions into an image resonated with his ambitions of overcoming the secondary status of photography in the hierarchy of the official Soviet culture. Another popular way of intervening and transgressing the documentality of photographic images was collage. This technique, favored by the avant-garde artists of the 1920s, 1930s, experienced its second revival in the 60s, 70s. Almost all photographers went through episodes of experimenting with collages. We can find constructed photo compositions both in Yuri Rupin and Oleg Malovany's body of work. But for Alexander Suprun, collage was the primary instrument from 1974 till the late 1990s. Born and raised in a small village near Kharkiv, he was particularly drawn to the topics of nature and rural life. Supron wanted to preserve the firm connection with reality and create images which don't immediately give away their constructed character and first puzzle the public. He worked with the topics that were seemingly widespread in the official Soviet photography, like labor or childhood. At the same time, the artist offered such a perspective that brings out critical and ironic aspects of the perception. Supron underscores wariness, vulnerability of his personages, which are never shown in the utopian reportages in the Soviet press. One of the photographic techniques, posterization, known more as isogelia in the post-Soviet realm, removes the continuous gradation of tones. Posterization replaces it with several areas of the same tonal density. Thus, we have an image with lesser depth and bigger accent on silhouette, decorative qualities of lines and spots. This technique also had its color version, in which those tonal areas were assigned with certain colors. It is a complex process of isopolychromy. Isopolychromy developed at the beginning of the 1950s as a scientific tool of photometry, was consequently adapted by artists as an artistic tool. Isopolychromy was extremely complex and painstaking. Oleg Malovanny was praised among Kharkiv photographers for his virtuosity with it. The artist says it usually took up to a week of full-time work on one isopolychromic print. Apart from being so time-consuming, one could hardly exactly predict and control the final result. One of the reasons Malovanny challenged himself with this technique was the rarity of color photography in the USSR and impression it had on the viewer. First of all, the very process of creating color images was complex and hardly possible to convey in the improvised bathroom darkrooms where most of the population used to print their photographs. What is more, chromogenic color materials were expensive or of poor quality, giving incorrect and quickly fading hues. Another option available to Soviet photo enthusiasts were color slides, demonstrated mainly using slide projectors. Often at someone's apartment, slides were a perfect tool for sharing images that wouldn't have been allowed in the official public spaces. Boris Mikhailov introduced the method of overlaying slides, which received the slang title sandwiches, butterbrot, among the Kharkiv photographers. Superimposing two frames resulted in absurd, surrealistic fusion of bodies and mundane scenes that were compiled in a series called Yesterday's Sandwich. They were demonstrated in the prearranged slideshows accompanied by music like Pink Floyd. It also hints at the habit of reading between the lines that was developed by citizens of the USSR in the regulated environment. But one can also see superimpositions as the fundamental method of the whole Kharkiv school of photography, as Kharkiv artists constantly work with overlaying photography with other mediums and approaches, collaging, staging, and hand coloring. Hand coloring photographic prints has been known almost since the invention of the medium. It quickly fell out of fashion after the late 1930s, when the first widely available technologies for color photography were introduced. But in the Soviet Union, the situation was slightly different. Apart from the absence of quality colored films and paper in the country, its territory was so huge that certain parts of the population simply didn't have access to the professional photographic services. As a response to this situation, the phenomenon of luriki appeared. Luriki is the colloquial name for the made-to-order domestic photographs produced for people living far from big cities and towns in Siberia, Kazakhstan, and Caucasus, and so on. This unofficial business, which flourished during the late Soviet period, especially in Kharkiv, had a highly structured network. First, collectors, visited clients directly and gathered sample source images like photo for the documents. Then those source images were passed to photographers who enlarged them, and then another person retouched and colored the final photos before they were returned to the clients. Many Kharkiv photographers, including Boris Mikhailov, earned a part of their living by making luriki. Mikhailov was the first among Kharkiv artists who transformed this utilitarian practice into the aesthetical gesture. In his series Luriki, he utilizes an archive of the appropriated anonymous photographs he had accumulated while creating commercial tinted portraits. The coloring in the series is deliberately offbeat and brighter in comparison to commercial luriki. This way, Mikhailov underlined the lagging and kitschy nature, borne out the thirst of Soviet person for making the beautiful even more beautiful. Luriki explores the average Soviet lifestyle, highlighting some patterns in the anonymous entity. The discussed methods, staged photography, solarizations, and other types of photographica, and hand coloring as well, are seemingly disconnected, but all of them revolve around the emancipatory potential of experiment. The Kharkiv photographers refused to see photography as a mere mirror of the surrounding world. They were studying its inherent subjectivity to challenge totalitarian ideas of only one single truth. Accentuated craftness of the photographic processes allowed them to grow multiplicity of visions and expressions. At the same time, they broke the sacralized bond between photography and reality, pointing at the abyss between the utopian imagery of the USSR in the official media and everyday life.